Hello, everyone. I'm Yolanda Cooper. I'm Vice Provost and University Librarian here at Case, Western Reserve. And I want to welcome everybody here in the room and those of you that are joining us virtually. In 2005, contributions from Samuel Freedman and Marion Krishner Freedman, both alums here at Case, led to the creation of the Freedman Center for Digital Scholarship, which is partly this space that you are in right now. A series of Freedman Family Gifts followed that helped with the development of the Freedman Faculty Fellows. The endowment makes it possible for KSL to provide direct support in innovation and the development of new forms of scholarship here at CWRU. The program today will allow you to meet this year's fellows and to gain an overview of their work as Freedman Fellows this past year. And I would encourage you to, if you're interested, to go to the website. There's more from the other fellows from the past years that you might find interesting. I do want to take this time to acknowledge and thank the Freedman family for their vision, generosity, and support in providing the resources and space to develop new and innovative forms of research and to expand digital scholarship through our current and future fellows. I want to thank the fellows this year for their participation, the Digital Scholarship team, who've been active contributors to this program, and to this year's coordinator, Ben Gorham. So to learn more about the fellows and move on with the program, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Ben.
All right. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us here today. If you don't know me, I am Ben Gorham. I'm the Research Data and GIS Specialist here with the Freedman Fellowship with the Digital Scholarship team with Kelvin Smith Library. And I am have the honor this year of serving as the Freedman Fellowship Coordinator. And I'd like to say what a privilege it is and has been to work with so many of our fellows over the years. Here at the Freedman Center, we are always invested in the evolving technologies of digital scholarship, as well as in the researchers who use them. As a digital scholarship center, it's part of our mission to find new tools and methods and to induct them into the repertoire of researchers across campus. We are fortunate to partner with faculty and students at every stage of the research lifecycle, from planning to publication, and to explore their projects and these digital resources together. Our collaborators come to us from across the campus, and their projects run the gamut as well. From graduate school nursing undergrad or students building digital networks of inter-hospital transport routes, to classics professors generating 3D scans and virtual reconstructions of ancient artifacts using CAT scans, and everything in between. And we have found that often, and especially for digital scholarship, the process is the product. The process of experimentation, of iteration, of failure, and of discovery has the power to transform not just a researcher's current project, but the trajectory of their future work as well. So today we're going to hear from a variety of presenters in this arena, faculty and student fellows from across campus, about their Freedman Fellowship projects at whatever stage they currently stand. And I want to remind everybody that the fellowship year isn't over. So it's okay if your work isn't quite finished yet. Don't panic. We just want to hear what you've gotten up to so far and where you're going next. It is a blessing and a curse that so many digital scholarship projects grow and evolve to encompass a scope that goes far beyond a single academic year. But it is always a pleasure to work alongside these researchers and see where they are today. Some brief points of order. This is our largest and most diverse fellowship year on record, so we're a little bit tight for time. So each presenter has 10 minutes to talk, and we're going to have a question and answer break after the first round of presenters. You can see that on your programs. And so if you would hold your questions until then. We have someone monitoring the chat for the live stream as well. He'll relay questions that come in there. And of course, snacks are in the back. Don't be shy. Please eat those. So to kick things off, let's welcome our first presenter, Dr. Jacqueline Curtis from the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences, to talk about the Seen Kids project. I'm just going to pull that up for you.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump in because I know we are tight for time. Really quickly, I also want to say that in addition to the work you see here presented through the generous grant from the Freedman Foundation, what I am also doing on the side is the grant allowed me to apply for, and I was accepted into the Harvard University, the School of Medicine class, Media in Medicine, How to Tell Stories That Make a Difference, which I am currently in. And although I won't be talking about it today, I will also say that the reason I am doing that is to allow me to expand what I do with my digital scholarship so I can communicate to a much larger audience. I am a scientist. I am trained to write for science. I am not trained to write for people outside of science, and that's something I very much wanted to change. I didn't want whatever I created with this fellowship to stay within the silo of science. I wanted it to be very broad for research and advocacy. So that is also something that's ongoing and another presentation all on its own of what I'm learning there. So first, a thank you, of course, for the funding that has allowed me to undertake this research agenda, to Ben, who has been inspirational in terms of ideas and helping me stay accountable to myself and what I said I would do, and just helping me to move the project forward consistently. And it's also, I want to say, as somebody who's a spatial epidemiologist, so using geographic information systems and geospatial technology, to have been here on campus is such a gift. He has been a gift to my classes for years, and to have him bring his expertise to help in my research as well has been a real joy. And we're just blessed, I think, to have him here at Case. And then finally, to my amazing daughter. So this project started because of my daughter. Now in science, we're often trained to be like so objective and like keep our personal lives personal. But I've actually found that, and this isn't my phrase, but science is a human endeavor. It's done by scientists who are humans and who do have these lives. And I think that actually we do greater service both to science and to our students in teaching them when we allow that openness to occur. So my daughter is neurodiverse. She has dyslexia. And then along the way, she has dyspraxia and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, maybe some high functioning autism, and just sprinkle in a few other things as well. She is amazing and completely healthy, but she has all of these quote unquote disorders, learning disabilities, etc. Now, in the pandemic, as some of you already know, my lab was very much involved in mapping every case of COVID in Northeast Ohio and communicating that to our health systems and public health and getting resources where they were needed ASAP. So as soon as you came in and tested positive, it hit the health system. We saw it, we mapped it, we see the clusters, we see where it's growing, we see where it's declining, etc. This was really years of my life. While I was doing this, my daughter was taking classes at home. So I had a third grader and then a fourth grader sitting next to me, laptops side by side. And it was the first time I could see what being neurodiverse in the classroom actually means. It explained so much, and she has wonderful teachers. This isn't a knock on that, but it explained to me why there's anxiety, why there's depression, why you don't feel good about yourself, why we're at the doctor for a lot of the physical manifestations of this. And I thought, well, if I ever get out of this COVID surveillance, this is going to be the rest of my career. We are going to like deep dive into neurodiversity. What are the health implications? Are we catching these kids early enough? Are we diagnosing them properly? Let's take all we know about all these other health and disease issues that I work on a daily basis, and let's apply it to neurodiversity. Neurodiversity for me is just the idea that people's brains are not all the same and we navigate the world differently. And that's not unhealthy or bad or a disorder. It's just different. Okay. A lot of neurodivergent conditions or neurodiverse conditions are well studied, as they should be. Autism spectrum disorder conditions come up. They get a lot of funding, a lot of study. ADHD also gets a lot of attention and a lot of study. But that's because they're medical diagnoses in the electronic health system, and they are relatively easy to study because of that. Dyslexia, which is my entrance point into this world, is a condition that is diagnosed in a school environment and very often does not make it across into the electronic health record. So we're really left with what's in the educational record as our data source, which is very challenging, and I'll get into quickly. And I hope, Ben, somebody's giving me a time warning on this. So basically, dyslexia, it's basically a phonemic processing difference. So it's a brain difference. The phoneme is the smallest part of the word. And here you see the example of cat versus cab. It's tiny. It's a small difference. But if you can't process that quickly and effectively in a school environment as a kindergartner, you're sunk. Like, it's going to get real hard, real fast, and you're going to feel very bad about yourself. So this leads the National Institutes of Health to state that for those with dyslexia, the prognosis is mixed. And I want to follow up on this point really quickly. Why? Why is that? It's just a difference in processing a phoneme, this tiny part of a word. It shouldn't make that much difference in a kid's life, okay? However, and I'm going to use some of my daughter's own words here, not scientific words. Kids who have dyslexia, they suffer. And they do eventually even die because of it. Because if you think about how a kid feels in school, if they don't feel engaged and like they belong, they eventually get out of it and oftentimes take on risk-taking behaviors. So I know some people may think I'm being hyperbolic here, but I'm really not. So they think they're stupid and they're weird. My daughter's words. They're not stupid, nor are they weird. In fact, they're very creative, intelligent people. But what happens here is that they're often diagnosed late, so later in their education, or not at all. Now, Ohio is better than most. We have a dyslexia law. We try to catch them early here, but this is not universal, okay? So there are a lot of kids across the U.S. and globally diagnosed late or not at all, and by then the damage is done. So what do we need here? We need, and I'm a data person, so we need national level data to monitor the situation. So we can't be looking at this piecemeal state by state or community by community. But what we have found through this project is that the data, the national data, are outdated. They're really old and they lag. They're difficult to get through. And I say this having had 2 data scientists work with me on this project. It's difficult to unearth and make sense of. And then, you know, what do you do with it? Like, how can it be utilized? That was what we were doing in this project. So we were developing the data. We're designing a web mapping engine so we can map this data and look at it by community. We're disseminating it. And then ideally, we're using this as a tool to improve research and advocacy to improve that education and health of these kids. Where are we right now? A ton of data science has been poured into this. We do have good data that is now, by good data, I mean, we have the data from the U.S. Department of Education. This is being recorded. I shouldn't have said that. We have data from the Department of Education that's publicly available where we can capture all conditions covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which dyslexia is one of them, at least as a proxy measure. We have maps, and this is where I'm going to end it here. The results that we have, they are what I'm calling an intriguingly mixed bag, and I'm trying to make this positive, of what's going on here. So you're looking at a map of schools. I'm intentionally not showing you where it is. And what we're finding, and this is the percentage of students with a diagnosis of dyslexia. Prevalence rates are discussed. There's not one, but somewhere between 5% and 20% of a school population should have a diagnosis population if it matches the general pop. So if they fall within that range, the school gets a good categorization. If they fall well below it, they're bad. Obviously, most of the map is bad. We are a diagnosis desert. We kind of knew that going in. Then we have the weird, which is strangely elevated diagnosis rates, and a whole lot of missing on the map as well. This is what we're doing right now, is how to make sense of this in an ethical and just way to not stigmatize any school, but still release the data in a way that the public can see it and can use it as a tool for advocacy. So the work continues. And if I just leak this really quickly into what I'm learning from my Harvard course at Media Medicine, I'm using this as the basis for a visual op-ed and an op-ed to get ready to go for October at a major news outlet, a couple major news outlets, because October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. So going to bring it full circle at that point and carry on. And thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And you actually have time to stay. Yeah, amazing. No. Okay. Well, thank you. And we're going to move on. If you'd like to go ahead and come on up, I'll get your slideshow ready to go. Or do you want to start with the video? Yeah. Video first? Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Xiao. Before I start my presentation, I would like to invite you guys to watch the documentary, I Have the Final Product. So we're going to watch the first 1 minute of the documentary. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Chinese students are the biggest group among international students in the United States. Although Chinese international students contribute significantly to the culture and academic landscape of American universities, they encounter some stereotypes. For example, they are super rich and they like showing off. Or they only hang out with other Chinese students and their English is not good enough. So, who are Chinese students? And how do they make sense of these stereotypes? In this documentary, we invited some Chinese international students and Case Western Reserve University to share their experience in the United States and their responses to those stereotypes. Our hope is that by listening to their stories, more people can realize the diversity among Chinese international students.
I hope you guys recognize that's my voice.
My name's Kevin.
I don't
Wu,
particularly
and,
like
Kevin is my preferred name.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Xia Wu. I'm a lecturer from the writing program and the English department. So today I'm going to be here to present my final product, the project that I did with the Freedman Fellowship. And I'm very grateful that I had these opportunities to make my dream come true. And many thanks. So this is the outline for my presentation. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how did I come to this topic, and then what kind of process that I've been through and what I learned from this project and what challenges I encountered during this process. And then I will talk about what's the next step that I would like to take. So something about how did I come to this topic, I guess it's related to my personal experience. 10 years ago, I was an international student coming from China studying in the United States. I was well aware about some stereotypes socially associated with Chinese international students. For example, they are passive, they don't speak in the class. So I really wanted to know, is that true? Then during my doctoral study, I conducted a study to invite some undergraduate students, Chinese undergraduate students, and then I observed their class activity, their discussion, and I learned that helped me to understand those stereotypes are not true. But I was very proud because I saw my dissertation help me to challenge those stereotypes. However, at the same time, I also realized the audience that my dissertation can reach is very limited. So at that time, I was looking for other opportunities to let the Chinese international students, their voice to be heard by a more broader audience. So I had this idea in my mind. Now I'm teaching first year writing to international students, and most of the students are coming from China. So in our class, one of their assignments is to read this article called Crazy Rich Chinese, a mixed method examination of perceived stereotype and associated social adaptation challenge among Chinese international students in the United States. So for their assignment, they need to read this article, summarize it, and write their response. So the first time I read the response, I was like, wow, I really need to find the opportunity to let other people to hear my student voice. To give you guys an example, one stereotype is mentioned by this article is Chinese students, they are super rich, they are crazily rich, and they like showing off. I remember one of my students in the response paper told me that, yes, we are rich, because in order to study abroad, we went to international school, and the tuition fee for international school, high school, is much more expensive than traditional regular high school in China. And also because they have to apply school in the United States, they have to take SAT or TOEFL, this kind of tests. And these tests is not cheap. And oftentimes they have to take multiple times in order to get a higher grade. So these are not cheap. And then eventually, if they're lucky enough, they get an offer from the university in the United States. They have to buy tickets, flight tickets. They have to pay the tuition fees, housing, meal plans, everything. Well, everything ended up together, the number is huge. So I was convinced, and I thought, such great idea. I need to show this to more people to know that. So I had this mind, and then feel very lucky, fortunate that I get support from the Freedman Center so that I can make this documentary so that I can make more people to hear the voice from the Chinese international students. And also, I want to express my gratitude to the students who work with me during this project. So as a matter of fact, I finished the product. So this is the timeline for my project. I started to prepare for this project in September 2023. And then I did the interview in November 2023, a month, and I interviewed 25 students. Each one was about 30 minutes long. And then at the same time, I also did some short video filming on campus or in gym or when the students are doing grocery shopping or they are having lunch or dinner together. And eventually we were able to use those short video as B-roll in the documentary. And then the editing work, we started that from mid-December 2023 and completed that in March 2024. Okay, and then what I have learned from this project, first of all, of course, is the process and how to make a film. And second, I really want to share with you guys is the language. So I want to show you guys the draft. I have been trained how to write in English in academic setting, but I haven't been trained how to write a script for documentary. So this is the first draft that I wrote for my opening narrative. And I show this to my friends. My friends say, no, you don't want to show this in your film because these language are too formal. So I had to revise and revise. And eventually, I was able to use the revised one into my documentary. That's what you just watched at the first minutes of the documentary. And also this is, I don't remember, this is how many versions that I took. This is the editing outline that I shared with my student who is doing the editing work. Because of that, the students will know how I wanted to deal with the footage. Okay, so this is one thing that I learned. And also I want to mention, because the students that are hired for this program, they are international students. So they don't have social security number. When I hire them, I have to do some extra work. So the hiring process is a little bit complicated. And last one, I thought it's pretty funny because I learned what is speed type, what is IPO, what is the difference between these two. I thought this is something I really want to share with you guys. Okay, and then challenges. First of all, finding some graduate interviewee was a challenge for me because my students are undergraduate and their friends mostly are undergraduate. We don't have many connection with graduate students, Chinese graduate students here. And also the coordinating, finding a time and place work for both the interviewee and my team member is hard. So most of the interviewee we did was on weekend or Friday afternoon. And now the challenge that I have is I don't have many channels to spread out words. So I wonder if you guys could give me some ideas. And last is what's next. So I get some idea from my friends. So I thought, okay, maybe I could bring my documentary to Association for Asian Study annual conference, which will be held in Columbus next year. And also I know we have a Cleveland International Film Festival. And so I think, okay, maybe I can bring my documentary there. And lastly, I think I can spread the word out through my personal connection, like a Center for International Affairs and my friends, my colleagues in different departments in the school I went in. So, and case. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaowu. Next up, we have George Blake. Let me get your slides ready for you here. Come on up.
Yes.
All right, take it away.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to the Freedman Center for Digital Scholarship. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I guess I'm just returning from parental leave. So if that comes through in my presentation or if I happen to fall over, then that's why. So this project has had a trajectory that connects to teaching in the SAGES writing program. SAGES is dead, long live SAGES. I teach, I'm sort of a Clevelandologist. I do a lot about Cleveland. And one of the things that I teach is, in some sense, how to tell stories about Cleveland. And I was getting a lot of students who were writing about lead poisoning. And so that led to digging into how the story is being told. I grew up in Cleveland. I grew up around a lot of the lead poisoning issues. I had a lead poisoning person over at my house recently before my daughter was born. So it's an issue that I've been aware of for a long time, and it's been interesting to see how as someone who looks at, I guess you could say, the relationship between old media and new media, or old media and the digital disruption, how the kinds of stories about lead have shifted and how they're being told. So that's what this process is about. I'll start off, and I guess just one side project from this is that I'm also, I have a publication coming out in something that's about teaching the Rust Belt through Rutgers, and that's going to inflect some of this work. So I love this idea of telling stories that make a difference. I'm constantly in the space of interfacing with students who are going into very specific kinds of discourse communities, and then trying to also open them up to the idea of how would you explain that to your grandmother? That's sort of my big question for a lot of our first year writers. And so I do a lot of trying to make that legible. And so in looking at the history of journalism about this issue, I've found this kind of long trajectory from the late 19th century to the present that has this sort of fascinating bookend. The first article I found about lead poisoning was from the Plain Dealer, 1884. And it was about how the Cleveland Health Board reached out to the Philadelphia Health Board to discover, quote, what action the Philadelphia Board takes to prevent the employees of white lead manufacturers from being afflicted by lead poisoning, end quote. Which is to say, there was comparison between cities from the very beginning. And with the new movement in Cleveland journalism is sort of towards this kind of idea of solutions journalism, which is really oriented around, we have a problem here, what are other people doing in other places? And so it's sort of, it was just sort of a fascinating discovery to see that the big story in 1884 was what's Philadelphia doing in Cleveland. So this is about Cleveland, but I guess what I'm going to show is that there's a magic in comparison, and the stories about Cleveland that journalists have been telling have often been comparative stories. Okay, so the three objectives are to create sort of this digital museum of maps using story maps. And what's happened, particularly since Flint, is that people have said, look, Flint happened, but there's lead levels at all these other places across the country that are higher than Flint. Let me show you a map. And Cleveland is often one of those places that's mentioned. And so one of the projects is to just take an inventory of all the maps. What news outlets are doing it, what universities are doing it, and put them all together and say, are these all telling the same story? What are the different kinds of data sets? So that's one of the projects. Another project is just looking at the history of how lead has been covered in the Plain Dealer and in the Colin Post. And I'll show you a little bit of that timeline. None of this stuff is in its flashy, interactive fun phase yet, but it's all kind of nearby. And finally, looking at how there are different frames for discussing lead poisoning, that there's certain things that just come up again and again and again, that it's, the kind of classic example is that some people frame lead poisoning as an environmental injustice. Some people that sort of is particularly attuned to certain groups and structural inequality. And there are other framings that are about it being an epidemic that's disconnected from a language of justice and inequality. So kind of looking for certain ways in which there's like narrative tropes. Okay. Okay, good. So the history of it as silent the language of journalism about lead is often about how not enough people know about lead or that it's otherwise invisible or inaudible. So just this is one example. The mid 60s was kind of the decade when the silent epidemic became really the language to talk about lead. But the silent epidemic, the hidden danger, hidden poison, that was a Chris Wallace special, silent disease. Vernon Jordan in the 70s wrote for the Call and Post that how many victims does a disease have to claim before it is recognized as an epidemic? Okay, so there's a lot about looking at it and finding that the language people use to talk about lead is that it is not known well enough, both because you don't see it. And this helps put a little bit of a light on Flint, because part of the Flint story was how powerful the visual was of water that was brown, which is very much contrasted to an embedded thing that almost all houses before certain eras, 1978, depending on who tells you, has lead in it, and it's just hiding in the walls and no one can tell, and that it impacts children who engage with kind of hand-to-mouth activity from lead dust. But you don't see it right away. It's hard to, it's a much more difficult to visualize problem. So the contrast is like, how are people visualizing it now? And so there are these big visualization efforts this is Reuters. And a lot of these frames are, again, coming out of Flint. So there was a major issue in Flint, and now look at this map of the stories in other places, including Cleveland. And so here's a list of some of the places: Reuters, Vox, Columbia Climate School, Minneapolis Department of Health. And what we're doing is creating a museum that is showing these different ways of visualizing the issue. Lead, of course, is complicated because Flint is the idiomatic case for a lot of people, but that's a water issue. Paint is the real issue in Cleveland. And so the kinds of maps that, it's complicated to think about how to create a comparative mapping thing. And there's all these kinds of issues of missing data that the Reuters study is based on a blood lead level test that they have, but only 34 states gave them data on blood lead level because you're not required to do it. So part of the story of these maps is, what are the limitations for doing comparison? Because so much of the comparative work that allows solutions journalism to be powerful is if you have an apples to apples approach, but the data about lead is not always available, and it's not always done in the same way. Okay. So yes, and so just generally the idea of insufficient attention, silence, that continues to be a trope. In 2016, the New York Times covered Cleveland as this other place you should know about. And the story was, many people saying not enough people are paying attention, the general public is oblivious. Anyway, so that's something that happens again and again. To cover lead poisoning is to cover how not enough people are covering lead poisoning. The timeline of digitized newspapers and the challenge of the archive. So this is a little bit, this is part of the methodology. I had two great research assistants working with me on this. And it's essentially going through the Call and Post archives, going through the Plain Dealer archives, and seeing what articles there are and what trends we have. There's this early, this is just a smattering. I'm kind of not at the point of totally signposting everything into clear chunks, but you can see early on, a lot of the stories are about individuals working in occupations associated with lead, dying from lead. Then there's milk as a remedy. There's a scientific basis to this. The body experiences lead as calcium. Anyways, it's a thing, but again, we see that lead poisoning is, what's interesting to me about a lot of these articles is how much they're indicating how prevalent a problem it is in Cleveland. This is not a new problem. And the idea of how not new this problem is and how much the story gets repeated is part of the, tragedy of this research, I guess. In the 50s, there are a bunch of stories in both the Plain Dealer and the Call and Post that are paying attention to individual child mortality. And again, the language is, look at how this happens every year. So there's a very old way of describing lead, which is about how it keeps happening. Okay, in the 60s is when it gets kind of inflected more with the civil rights angle. It emerges into public consciousness as primarily an urban issue. This is a fascinating one. This is from the Colin Post, and it involves a ghetto jury, people representing Black Cleveland, sort of saying all the ways in which Cleveland is failing its Black citizens. And Martin Luther King is on this jury. And during this mock jury where they're saying Cleveland is failing and, there are people who are being impacted, he responds by saying that he's going to help someone paint her apartment so that the lead is not an issue. It's an interesting moment because that is essentially still the legislation that is trying to be implemented, is that people getting their apartments painted who are living in rentals is the key push from 2019. And, we're not anywhere near completion of that. Okay, yeah, so there's the idea, I guess in the 70s, we see more of a discourse break towards what are different institutional bodies doing in relationship to this? What are different funding things? How are different funding things happen? That's where the emphasis of the story goes. Okay, one thing that I did in this paper in this project that I had a research assistant do because I don't have the stomach for it was looking at social media posts related to lead stories. And just kind of getting a sense, I'm still not exactly sure where I'm going to go with this, but there's a level of looking across these different platforms and just finding how people in Cleveland are responding to the recent initiatives regarding lead poisoning and then seeing what's sort of trending. And, there's a whole host of things. Thank you. In social media, there's sort of a trend on TikTok in the language of like boomer. I don't know what the boomer thing is exactly, or people being mad at each other across generations, but now there's a thing to call boomers lead poisoned. And then so they're boomers who clap back and say that I'm not lead poisoned. I don't know. And then there's some vicious stuff on Reddit and a range of things. But, there's some specific focusing in on, this, I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me is like these chasms between discourse communities. So it's really important that Cleveland take care of lead safety, whatever. And then someone's like, I'm a low resource landlord. There's no way I can do this. And finding those points of just kind of chasms between the ways that people are talking to each other, but they're not talking across those things. That happens a little bit on social media. Okay, and then so I just have a few case studies here. I'll just kind of just give you a sense of what they are. Louis Stokes is definitely an important person in how I got involved in this issue. If Carl Stokes had never been elected mayor of Cleveland, my parents never would have met. I can tell you that story in another day. But Stokes has been critiquing lead poisoning since the 70s, and it's sort of interesting how much the stories that his talking points reemerge just basically as our common sense right now. So he talks about primary prevention in the early 90s. We're now trying to move towards a system of primary prevention. And then he talks about how this issue is not being paid attention to, which is the first rule of lead poisoning, is to talk about how not enough people are talking about lead poisoning. But there was a big story about George H.W. Bush's dog being lead poisoned, and he essentially says, why is that a national story? There are all these kids in Cleveland who are being impacted by the same thing. And then, the big toxic truth story in the 2015s, which is really potentially the catalyst for the 2019 legislation. They're talking about how, the things Stokes was pushing for weren't realized. Okay, so I'll kind of see if I can end up there. I'll just make one other note of this. There's this phrase, using children as lead detectors. It's an activist phrase that is really devastating to hear because it's essentially saying by testing blood levels for this thing that once you're impacted by it, you're already really damaged. It's not reversible. We're using children as lead detectors. So what we should be doing instead of testing children is making safe houses. But what's funny is that, so I first heard it in a City Club forum in 2021. but it's been around since 1981 in the daily news in New York. It's circulated. I found like 40 different instances of newspapers across the country where people have invoked this phrase. So that's like one of these, I guess, one of these things I'm kind of trying to zoom out on and trace the language that is an activist phrase that ends up having people have been pushing for primary prevention all over the place for a long time. And this helps kind of trace where some of those early kernels are from. Okay. Yeah. So I'm working to, we get these little bursts of information in general. It's very stressful to be a person these days, having a phone, finding a big story. With the lead thing, I'm really trying to give a big historical context, a broad context of where we are right now nationally, and showing that the Cleveland story is continually connected to these other stories in other places, and trying to zoom out and find ways of telling that big story so that it's contextualized within this larger thing. So thanks so much. These are my 4 great research assistants, and have a good one.
All right, thank you very much. I believe next up we have Yukiko Onitsuka. If you'd like to come up here, I'll get your slides ready. Right here. There you go.
I can hide here.
You want me to lower this?
Could you?
Absolutely, yes,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Too short. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, it's good.
It might go up on you.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Yukiko, and I am working on the project called Assessment of Manga Readability. I didn't think about this until I sent it out, this PDF file for the final version, but thank you so much for the Freedman Scholarship to work on, for having me work on this. And also my cohort, my liaison, David Beals, he's been a great help, and then every nagging question he answered it very nicely. Thank you so much for helping me out through and through. And also I want to thank for the Rachel. I don't know the last name of. I'm so sorry, but she had been great input for me as well. So without their help, I couldn't have done this. This far. My topic is the manga readability. Manga is Japanese graphic novels, and it's more or less like a comic books in the United States. So it's basically the same idea of what the comic books is all about. But the very similarity is that Japanese manga is also kind of have a really very lacking the value of educational values. Like they are talking about it's a child reading stuff, so kids for fun, not for school. However, what's contemporary in Japan, we can see, as far as I can see in Japan, is that there are more growing trend of using the manga or like the manga styles in public. Like this is the article posted on the train to attract the readers. And they are used in the textbooks, education books, and then everywhere. Now, this is also in the train station, but one possible reason why they are employing so much manga styles into their product is that it's the readability that people can pay attention, and people can understand what's going on, even though you don't understand Japanese. Maybe within this small one, I have no idea what they are trying to do, but it attracts. You want to take a look. So this is not an exception in the Japanese language field. By the way, I'm a lecturer here at the case, and I'm teaching Japanese. And I love to getting manga method in my teaching. So there are many teachers and then proficient second language learners or the foreign language learners. They are using manga as an authentic, functional, effective tool. And their recommendations are somewhat similar to, among the individuals. Like this is for the beginners, this is for more like the advanced people. But they are just based on their personal experience and the personal teaching experience. It's same as what I do is the same way. I teach manga courses, but that's simply based on my personal experience. So what I'm trying to do is detailize, the difficulty level of the manga, because many people are obviously interested in it and they are effective. So why not? In this studies, I used the 20 manga volumes, and then I worked on the first volume and then the 4 other episodes. I was gonna do the 5 volumes, but it's a lot. Among the 20 volumes, that the 9 are selected based on the frequently cited on the Google search, and then many people are recommending those are for the easy reading, and others are simply randomly chosen, but because of my choice, I like them. So in this presentation, I would like to talk about these things: a little background, research questions, research method, results, and then conclusion as far as I got for now. The manga area has been studied from different perspectives, and then of course they are interested in how the mangas are read. So they're trying to decipher how the manga is comprehended, and then how mangas are structured, and then how they can be used for the literacy practice. Even within the community of the English writing professors, they are using some of the manga for the K through 12 students to motivate them to read more, and another motivation for writing. So another aspect that I'm taking into account for this project is that the manga text, the Japanese text readability. So it's not has nothing to do with the visual portion of the manga, but it has to do with the Japanese difficulty levels, how they are counting for the Japanese text difficulties. So they are considering, when it comes to the Japanese text, they are considering the use of kanji. Kanji is the Chinese ideograms. So we have like 2,000 kanjis to memorize up to the proficiency level. And we have vocabulary complexity, sentence structure, much more to the grammatical understanding of the language. And then Furigana 8, these are like phonetic readings of the kanji. Again, kanji, we have over 2,000. And I don't think I can read all of them. I can somehow recognize them, but not that proficient. So the furiganas are often used as a reading aid. These are phonetic alphabets. And contextual clarity, writing styles, and audience constellation, and the cultural references, they are all taken into consideration when it comes to the text readability. This is, I think, much or less similar to the English readability as well. So in this study, however, when I am testing for the readability, I'm using this computation introduced in the jreadability.net. And their formula is using a vast, textbooks, the text itself, and then they're tested quite well. And many of the other scholars have been citing this site as their point of reference, and then they're testing their idea of how the text can be difficult. So I am looking into this through this JReadability test. The questions that I'm asking is the score through this JReadability score, and also like how are they vary among the titles that I selected, and to an extent, are they really for beginners, or are they really for the advanced speaker as they recommended? The method I'm using, again, I'm employing 20 different titles. The procedure with this, it seems simple, transcribing the manga text into the analyzable format because it's picture. So I'm getting the text all of the manga and into the analyzable format, which is in the document file. And then check the details by the different people, and just one person for now. And then analyzing the text through this jreadability.net. And then analyzing this. But this transcribing is really, really complicated step. So I have to put it into the text, just to, get out the text from the manga. And that was where I got really complex issues, and then, some tweaks and here and there. So this is the step I took, but also I had to follow the transcribing rules, which is kind of arbitrary. But then this study was, first of all, inspired by the random work done by online, and I have no idea who this person is. So I'm trying to follow as much as what he had done in that one. But from my understanding, he just read each manga and counted, physically counted, not digitally, like what I'm doing. So I have those rules. And then I got one preliminary data set. So this is the manga called Detective Conan, and its readability level was computed as the lower elementary and then very easy, which was not I expected. This was considered to be one of the hardest the mangas to introduce. But originally this was aimed for more like lower elementary kids. So it's kind of understandable to this one, but to this readability level. But to me, this is not easy for non-native speakers. So that's where I have to look into why this is the result, because some of the text that I had tested was quite suitable in the way that I understand. Like some of the text, considered to be easy came out as easy. Some of the text that I understand as a Japanese professor to be difficult was difficult, but not this one. So that's where I need to tweak. But their research is, their database is really rigorous. So they reading the vocab, part of the speech, the word type, and the character types. So they're really thorough. In the conclusion and the accomplishment is my preliminary research data. This has never been done, and I'm really proud that I went through this. And thank you so much for David, for helping me out. See, he had been very patient, nothing but patient. And the challenge is, of course, is that because the JReadability.net is not meant for the manga readability testing, so maybe there are more to just the text reading. Of course, the visual reading is one of the things that I have to look into next. But I had to tweak a little bit in order to the JReadability to do the right reading. So I had that manipulation, which probably altered the result greatly. So I have to find it out. The next the endeavor that I'm taking is I want to continue with this research because I want to make this as a database. But also I would like to take into account of art or the visual literacy assessment and so much of the social influence, the cultural understanding on the manga, the influences on the, whether it's easy or not to read. And impact. I'm going to make a database. Thank you.
Okay, next up, Scott Emery Moore. Would you like me to raise this? Sure. Well, yeah. All right. There you go. Thank you very much.
Hi. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I want to start quickly by, just kidding, clicking the right button. That's what I want to start with. Acknowledging the fact that this work really is not possible without support from community partners and collaborators and advocates. As many people may realize, the sex and gender diverse community is facing a lot of turmoil right now, which was a part of this work that I didn't anticipate in last summer. And a lot of these conversations that we wanted to have sort of became less important for some of the community partners because they were literally trying to help people fight for their lives. And I am really grateful for the time that they offered me and for the insights that they provided. And, they continue to be engaged. I also am really grateful that I've been able to work with students from social work, medicine, and nursing in some of this work. And it's even inspired some work that I get to show you at the end that wasn't originally part of the plan, but turned out to be really helpful. And lastly, I couldn't have done this without the Freedman Fellowship funding. It really allowed us to make it worth the time that our community partners were willing to spend with us. So the big part of this project was to develop protocols and processes associated with building multimedia content to help improve healthcare provider preparedness and awareness related to sex and gender diverse communities' health. And we had two big deliverables that we want, and we're still working on both of them, but we did have an initial starting framework or protocol that came from Hall et al. That was used to identify digital health stories from people with strokes who were being sort of treated suspiciously by healthcare providers, not believing symptoms or not believing that they had long-term after effects, things like that. I used to work as a nurse practitioner in neuro, so I've seen this both on the neurology side as well as my students coming in talking to me and, my patients coming in talking to me and telling me that their primary care provider doesn't understand the fact that they're dizzy when they try and walk in a straight line because they don't understand the fact of where their stroke was or whatever else they're experiencing. So those are similar situations to what sex and gender diverse people experience. So we started with this idea of co-production as an approach to adaptation. And I don't know how many people are aware of sort of the need to sort of set levels, obviously, is one thing, but to understand that what the community agreed problem is a lot easier than for me to come in and say, obviously, here's the problem, let's fix it. Because the experiences that each person has, they're not universal. They're not necessarily, there's not a list, and once you've had all 10, you're done. You don't ever experience them again, because I promise you, healthcare systems are inventing new and great ways to discriminate against people on a regular basis. And this is part of what I learned, even as a provider who's been very privileged to navigate things as well as I have. I still am continuing to hear things for the first time that I never thought I'd hear. And then we also wanted to sort of clarify positionality and understand desired outcomes, both simply and directly, because I think obviously we'd love to have a health system that is inclusive and affirming, and that would be a great outcome. But the piecewise movement toward that is to help improve the preparedness of providers to provide affirming and humanizing care. So David Brooks's How to Really Know Someone has this great story in it about a colleague of his asking him 3 questions. And I adapted those questions to help us understand what's the ultimate goal for healthcare provider preparation for sex and gender diverse care. And this is what the summation of this is, this turned into. Basically, safe and effective care, systems that aren't only inclusive, but that seek to understand the unique and dynamic needs of the population, open-minded and honest communication, and providers that listen and don't quickly assume that identities underlie all health issues. The second was what skills, knowledge, and experiences do we have to support the ultimate goal? And that's that the community feels really strongly that advocacy is obviously something that has been important, continues to be important, and will be important in the future. That community-based and community-developed coping and thriving mechanisms are a key part of how members already overcome these things, but how do we share that information with other people? And then also speaking truth about experiences, making sure that you're telling people if you're going to a provider and that provider discriminates against you or creates a unsafe feeling, that you're sharing that with people to make sure that other people aren't exposed to that same person. And just surviving is actually one of the things that seems to be probably the most important part, is that we've survived a lot, and we will continue to survive. What is the problem with the preparation of healthcare providers as we see it? And these are based on experiences from people, whether they're sort of filtered through our collaborators that are advocacy groups or people themselves or patient advocates themselves. I'm not going to read them all to you, but the keys here were that healthcare can't be transactional and it can't be dehumanizing, because that's not going to get to an end result, which is obviously something that we want to be visible and well supported in this environment. We've found a lot of other things to sort of tackle. One of the things that I learned, or that one of the people sort of, as we were talking about how things have changed since we originally started about talking about this work, they said we can't really anticipate what the future challenges are going to be. And we can't let that also stop us from trying to make health provider education better. And so I think one of the better parts that we found is that letting people tell their own stories, let them own their own identity, and let them create the base expectations for these interactions with providers is an important part of this. Not with providers coming in with their own frame and saying, this is what we're going to do. So I had 2 students that were working with me this semester, and they had worked on part of some of this data and some of the other data from some other work that I've done. And they developed a case study. They're presenting this tomorrow. I got permission from them to share this today. But they developed a case study. They developed a multi-part toolkit to help. Specifically, they started with nurses to help nurses to navigate these interactions with people, specifically in the community. And then we tested it in third-year students and found, and this is basically self-reported or comfort with providing care after being exposed to this information, and some of the changes that, and I forgot to include what the questions basically say, but the most stark change, which is question number 3, was literally in the comfort of actually providing care and access to resources in an affirming way. It wasn't about just sort of knowing how to say, these are my pronouns or anything else. It was truly actionable things. And those were the things that we thought were super important. And I'm super proud of the work that they did. And that would not have been, they still would have been working on something similar, but it would not have been as inspired if they hadn't been exposed to some of the work that we had started with this project. So thank you so much.
Next up, we have Alpsir Yoglu. How'd I do? Yeah. Good enough? Okay. And do you want to start with the video or your slides? Slides first? Okay. Okay, yes, you can Alt-Tab, and I think we have it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. Well, if it's not there, it should be somewhere. We'll find it for you. Yeah. Let me know. Alt-Tab over whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. My name is Abshir Lola. I'm an associate professor here at the Material Science and Engineering Department. And I would like to thank the Freedman Center for Digital Fellowship and specifically David and Ben for their help. So I started this work to collect preliminary data. What I end up collecting is pre-preliminary data. So I learned a lot about how to collect the data for what I want to do. And I also learned a lot from other fellows because they gave me lots of new ideas, not only for this project, but some other future things, hopefully. I haven't switched yet. So I'm an engineer, and so I don't have slides. I have utilitarian visual aids. My history goes back, I love crystallography, which is essentially teaching three-dimensional symmetry, right? How the atoms arrange in 3 dimensions to make all the crystals that we have around. And most of the materials are crystalline materials. And generally, when you think about it, you took symmetry for granted. Some of these are very simple, right? We have the triangles, right? I can rotate this 120 degrees. If it's equilateral, you won't be able to tell the difference. Square, I can rotate it 90 degrees. You wouldn't be able to tell me the difference. That's what we talk about, essentially rotational symmetry. And then, of course, for example, rectangle, I can rotate it 180 degrees. You won't notice, but I can rotate it. If I rotate it 90 degrees, you'll know the difference. So I broke one of the symmetries when I go from square to a rectangle. Of course, when we go to 3 dimensions, life gets a little bit complicated, right? I can try to draw them like this, or we can try to draw as such, where we use, we have a 3-dimensional symmetry, 3-fold rotation axis, which means essentially 120-degree rotation here, a 90-degree rotation there, right? I'm trying to teach this to my students, and it becomes very hard to see. I was lucky enough to be able to visualize things in 3D, but a lot of the people I encounter are not necessarily have the same tools. And then we include inversion symmetries, etc. to this. It gets really complicated. So the way we teach is essentially the things that you see at the bottom there. They're called the stereographic projections. And then also we teach the mathematics of this. We use, they learn how to do it, and then they apply this using matrices to the properties and figure out how the property in this direction relates to the property in that direction. So it's really important from the materials science perspective. It's nice, but generally people they learn how to do it, but they really don't understand how to apply it. They cannot go back to 3 dimension. And so for that, I start, but 8, 9 years ago, I saw the Interactive Commons early presentation on HoloLens. And I was like, okay, this is the perfect tool to teach three-dimensional symmetry because the teaching is in 3 dimensions. So I'm gonna run a video here. If it's not there. Oh, this is, oops, sorry. So, right, I first start teaching it, and this is a new app, but I start teaching it using with a computer science student. We build something where we put crystal structures in 3D. We look at with students from different directions. We rotate them, etc. And then 2 years ago, I was one of the first Interactive Commons fellows, and with their help, I started developing this tool, which essentially uses a 3-dimensional setup. So to someone who's not wearing that lens, they don't see it, so they see us moving around in empty space. So essentially, what we do is, right, there are all these what we call atoms that they need to move around and satisfy the symmetry in 3 dimensions, right? Now, this has nothing to do with what I was trying to do as a part of this fellowship, all right? What I want to do is, okay, I've been teaching using 3 dimension to HoloLenses for 7, 8 years now. One thing that I was doing before this was essentially treat it like a slideshow, right? There we have 3-dimensional perspective tools that you can do it on 3D screen, but you sit there and watch. Even if I rotate something in 3D, people sit down and watch. I want it to be an interactive tool. And I wanted to measure if this interactive tool is helping to improve the learning outcomes. So what we essentially propose as a part of this fellowship is to measure the interaction between the students and see how that helps to whether they get better in solving the problems. So and I went through the IRB training as an engineer. That was really difficult. It's very long, and the questions we get in those kind of questions are much simpler about all of the above type of things. And then I got to work with cognitive scientists, Faye Perel specifically, on this project. That was really helpful. And so they are right now, the students are solving this problem. But this is essentially their preliminary test. They have 3 tests, and then we go through a training, 2 experiences together, and after that we do 3 post-tests. And in the meantime, we are trying to video them. So this was our first video, so it's very difficult. There are not too many tools that can video both the real space and the holograms. So this is done through an app developed by the Interactive Commons. We are running that, and then while we are running that, we are collecting the screen recording. Right, so we get their motion, and eventually these motions are going to be turned into vectors. Right, those vectors, then you look at the interaction between those vectors. But this app doesn't allow you to collect audio, right? So in our second video, which is not here, there's another camera, right, that is collecting the audio and the real space without the hologram on it. Unfortunately, we couldn't do both. And ideally, we wanted to have several different angles eventually to collect. But we learned a lot how to collect this data. And I want to show you one. Well, yeah, good place. So now I have 1 minute, right? This is the best part. You see how they are talking to each other? Unfortunately, this doesn't have the audio. And this is always fun to watch. Now they are doing the full force rotation. Look at her reaction after they put that ball there. All right. And then when they solve it, it's even better. And it's going to happen in 30 seconds. But the point is that these were first-year students that are joined from the Engineering 145 class. as volunteers, so they had no idea about crystallography, three-dimensional symmetry, nothing, right? So they are going through what is given to them, and they are interacting, as you can see. So that is the difference between watching a PowerPoint and doing this one. So we want to quantify this, and we want to tie it to learning outcomes. But they are about to finish it. Just watch them. All right. Well, it's very, very encouraging to see this, right? To see that kind of enjoyment and interaction from it. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Thanks to all of our presenters so far who have shared with us. We are at our first break here. We have 15 minutes for folks to take a breather, get some food, and also to ask questions. So I hope you wrote down questions and are willing to share them now with the presenters. We do have a microphone set up over there if anyone would like to use it to ask a question so that the audio can be captured for the recording. So, questions for any of our presenters so far? Oh, I think this, yeah, what? Yeah, please.
I have a question for Dr. Blake. I'm curious about you talked about social media and lead. Something that I've kind of personally seen is there's a lot of talk about like the big Stanley Cup and like lead issues with those. Is that related at all? Is some of the same language that you're finding in these kind of more citywide water paint situations being then co-opted into that situation as well?
Well, I guess one of the interesting things about lead is how often it appears in the news cycle as a certain kind of breaking news. And so there was I don't know if anyone else saw the story, but there was juice boxes were found to have lead in them about 4 months ago. And it was a big story, and so I think one of the big things that I'm interested in is the relationship between what ends up being a headline. And I mean, I guess I'll just tell a story about the people who wrote Toxic Truth, which was the big kind of series that The Plain Dealer did in 2015. So Rachel Dissel and Bree Zeltner, they went to their editor and they said, we'd like to do something about this lead issue in Cleveland. And the editor essentially said, well, we've already done that issue. And they're like, yeah, but it's still a problem. So I think that for me is like one of the key things is what's the relationship between a story and a headline and a problem. And Cleveland has had this problem for a very long time, and there have been cycles of headlines about it, but the problem's still there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? I have one for Professor Wu. Really just, I want to know more, if you can, about what the process of recruiting the students was like. Were there trends in interest, who did want to participate, who didn't want to participate, what were their hesitations, that sort of thing?
Thank you for the question. For me, it was actually pretty easy because I teach international students, and most of them are coming from China. So some of them were my students in my class. So I have them as my interviewee, and then they also introduce their friends, which happen to be Chinese international students for me. And then it was hard for me to get some graduate students to be interviewed, which I hope that in the future I will have the opportunities to use them as the main target population. Yeah.
And a follow-up, you mentioned, I hope it's okay if I just forget.
Go ahead.
I think May is Asian and Pacific American Heritage Month.
Mhm.
And there's probably been recent events around that by diversity, equity, and inclusion groups on campus. So I wonder if we might be able to get your documentary involved with some of those.
I actually received an email this morning from them, and then I will stay in contact with them. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Other questions? Well, I've got one more. Okay, what do we have? I had a question for you, Kiko. So I'm a manga nerd myself. Yeah, of course. When I look at and I was curious if you found or like So manga comes in lots of different categories and kind of qualities and groups, like things like shonen. And I'm wondering if you anticipate or you're starting to see trends like shonen tend to have this type of readability score. And then the other question is, do you see a break in a divergence in content, like who it's written for based on the material and how readable the text is? So adult themes, hard to read, that sort of thing,
Yes, thank you so much for the question. Yes, definitely. I am like suspecting those are the tendencies because the shonen manga, those are the boys manga. So obviously their target audience is already aiming towards to that direction from through the a little upper elementary to the K 12 is the 12th grade and so forth. So I definitely expecting that there should be a tendency, but simply the text wise there are certain even it's kids words, they are difficult to decipher because sometimes that the kid says the things that the adults don't understand. Maybe you can understand the line by line or the word by word, but the underlining meaning is so different. So that's sort of a thing that I would like to get into, but I'm so at the beginning right now.
That's great, thank you. And the follow-up is, I'm 37. Should I stop reading shonen?
Oh, please.
Okay.
All times.
Any other questions? Yeah.
My question is for Scott. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing in this area. And I'm wondering if, so far in the work that you're doing with partners, if you, it sounds like you've been doing a lot to educate providers or prepare providers to support gender diversity. Do you anticipate or do you see resources that can be further developed for the patients that are coming from? Where do you see that going?
So that's actually the other part of my work is understanding what happens to people. And now in Ohio, this is sort of where we are. In 2 days, I think, it becomes illegal to get gender affirming care in the state. Sorry, it's really hard to talk about. What happens when you turn 18 and you don't know how to navigate those systems? So part of that is to develop a system. So part of the other work that I've been doing has been to develop a system that will pair patients with and their support systems with basically navigators to help them through the process of seeking affirming care from affirming providers and to get access to social determinants of health. Because, I mean, these people may be emancipated at 18 because of hate or being disowned from their families, and so their ability to navigate systems that aren't built for them, and that they can't really necessarily move to a state with better laws or have those opportunities. So our goal is to create systems that are developed through partnership with the community to support them. So yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Are we all good? People want to go get some snacks? All right, yes, okay, I'm getting some nods. So let's take a break. We will reconvene formally at 2:30 for the Student Fellows portion of the event. Help yourselves to some snacks, mill about, chat, be friends. Yes.
But I'm fine to be called Wendy, and I prefer to be called Wendy. My project was the continued development of the Freedman Fellows Scholar exhibit. So that's the introduction page. For this presentation, I'll just give you a quick overview. It's going to be the first objective, which is the big objective of the project. And then I found some problems in this project. I'm going to introduce that, and then I set some smaller goals for myself, and I'm going to introduce the strategy that I took, and then the outcomes of this academic year. And then there's still things that are ongoing right now. This project is a continued and progressing project, so there's more things to do, and also some future suggestions from a point of view of a person who came into a lot of challenges while doing this project. Okay, the objective is, as everyone would know, just to continue on developing the showcase website for the Freedman Fellows using Scalar. The problems were that before this project came to me, there were like things that were already produced. The page had like a title, an introduction of the Freedman Fellowships, and then individual pages of the descriptions of each project. So like there were like 140 of the pages, like all separately. So that was also another problem. And the pages were organized chronologically, which means it showed our first and very first project first rather than the latest project. So the problems that I found was that there was no consistent project information tracking, which meant that there were some projects without a department, or there were some projects with very less information about what the project it was and what the outcome was. And then the second problem was that informations were not organized or put into one page, so it could be like compared and contrasted. The third problem was that there was no set of topic to be analyzed. This comes from the second problem, which is there were no organized, like the information wasn't organized. So I set up personal goals, and the first one was to organize the information that are divided into a combined file, a single file for me and everyone else to see what's happening throughout the projects and the time. The second one was to compare and contrast the information using the combined file. This would come after the first one. And then finally, it will be to produce visualizations for the audience to comprehend and take in the information easily and concisely rather than reading a bunch of paragraphs, which might be really hard to understand if you don't really know about the Freedman Fellows or the project itself. So I united the individual information to one single file and then categorized the common information, organizing it. I verified the information that needs to be visualized. So I was like, I didn't visualize every single information that I had, but then I pointed out which ones were more important. And finally, I visualized those data into the best visualization I can. There were a lot of visualizations that I could use and interpret, but then I tried to play with it and also come up with one that is best for everyone else to read. So these are the outcomes that I accomplished in the academic year. The first one was to combine the information. So as you can see over here, they were in different pages and everything was just all over the place, I'll be honest. I put it into one single file using Google Sheets. The reason why I chose Google Sheets was that it was much easier to much easier to see what the information was and also compare them. And additionally, with Google Sheets, it's really easy to share and other people to contribute together. So I really like that easiness of sharing the information with other people and the other people also being able to edit it. Also, this is not on the presentation, but I also have scanned all the paperworks that were for the projects. For example, these projects were done in 2005. Digitalization was not normal in that day, so everything was on paper. So I was scanning them using the digital scholarships. So yay. And then the second one was to visualize the data. So after I finished combining it to one single file, I developed different types of visualizations. And then these are added to the page. So take a look, everyone. I used the embodiment to make it easier and also easier for updates and also really active for users. So on the page, if you put your mouse on top of the graphs, it will show like different details of the graph. So, and then as I was doing this was not my first goal to produce things, but I developed a scalar manual and CSS comments. CSS comments are for like HTML or like website designing. I developed this because I personally felt it was really hard to like go and find for informations at the time when I was like, I want to do this. I really want to do this, but how do I do it? So by developing this, I just hope that the participants who will be in this project in the future would be able to utilize this and also have like a head start before they start actually doing something. These two things are the things that I'm doing right now at the moment. So I'm trying to develop a word cloud which summarizes everything together, like what the projects were. And there were really similar words and concepts that were coming out consistently throughout the projects. So that's a word cloud. And the timeline starting from the most recent projects is also being developed right now. It just felt like knowing what the most recent project is would be much better for everyone else to understand what the project and the whole scholarship was. So that's going on. And finally, there's 3 future suggestions: consistency, information that is collected about the project should be considered in the future to evaluate and to keep on track of what's going on and how the money is being used. And secondly, other information. There were things that I thought could be more representing. For example, numerical values related to money or like the trends of the money. And then the third one would be showcaseable. One specific suggestion that I would like to have is to have like a picture or a non-word graphic to show the outcomes of the projects, because each projects were really vague in what they actually did and accomplished. So that's my future suggestions, and thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Anvita. I think we have you right here. Are you all good? Okay, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need to do. Feel free.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anvita, and my liaison is David Beals. First of all, I'd like to thank the Department of Sociology, KSL Digital Scholarship Center, and the Freedman Fellowship for giving me this opportunity. It's instilled in me much needed confidence and purpose to continue my journey towards PhD. Also, special thanks to David for his encouragement and patience, and also to Mary Erdmans for making qualitative research exciting and meaningful. So, the original idea started off a little differently. The project, I wanted to have a micro level focus on climate change discourse. The Conference of Party is the most influential decision-making body of the UN when it comes to climate change. And I wanted to use a critical discourse analysis to identify key dimensions of power and knowledge in terms of the areas and the issues addressed, look at the epistemology and the hermeneutics of the language adopted, some cultural rules and undertones, and also look at the differences between and within countries. as well as distribution of responsibilities, risks, and burdens that appear on reports. So just some basic information about a conference of parties. The main organizing body is UNFCCC, and they have like three bodies. One is the Conference of Parties. The other one is Kyoto Protocol, which is represented by CMP, and the Paris Agreement, which is represented by CMA. UN also divides countries based on Annex 1, which is mostly developed countries. Annex 2 countries are developed countries, but it does not include economies in transition to democracy or market economy. So this includes a lot of like Eastern European countries who are still not like fully democratic, and also a few Balkan nations. Non-annex countries mostly comprises of developing countries, small island developing states, and least developed countries, which is 155 countries in total. The Paris Agreement is important because it provides a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support to those countries that need it. So essentially, Paris Agreement, for the first time, it recognized that countries have different contributions to climate change, and also need to share burdens and risks differently. So how did it all start? It started with my narrative methods class, where I understood that secondary data can also be analyzed in terms of orality, because it's still people who are producing these data, even if the language appears to be very bureaucratic and neutral. It included collaboration from different experts. David was helping me with research methods and techniques. Professor Mary Edmonds helped me with methodology and sort of guided me on how to like code the analysis, how to think about it. And Eva D'Amato is an intern at UNFCCC who clarified a lot of the concepts for me. And this is my first time being an architect of a research project. I never had to do anything on my own. Like I never had to build a data set, see how to analyze it. And the research was very much exploratory, because it started with a set of loosely defined ideas, and now it's at a very interesting stage. And also it helped me pivot more towards programming and how to do analysis using Python. The initial findings, so initially we had a very large data set. It was approximately like 300 files, and it included everything from all the meeting notes, the deliberation that different entities within COP, the discussions they have, it included everything. And we looked at metadata, file name, title, and other details of the file. And we also did a few topic modeling visualization, like the one you can see in the picture, looking at the most common words that appear in the files. And then we decided to take a different direction, because the language that was used in these files was very neutral. It was bureaucratic. It was difficult to understand. And it was also a very large data set. And also that the initial findings do not reveal much about my point of interest. And at this point, David was doing most of the work, so I wanted to know how to actually do it. So I learned a little bit about text mining and text analysis using these sources. And now I know the basics of Python. I know how to do text mining and like a few modules in the Natural Languaging Toolkit package. And we also did a few initial codes in NVivo. So we used Annex 1, Annex 2, non-Annex. We also looked at words of persuasion, coercion, and assertion, just to see how people are talking about climate change. Do they talk about it with some sense of urgency? Are they mandating stuff, or are they leaving? Are they only using? Are they not giving mandates? And we also looked at groups of countries as well. At the current stage, we decided to go with a much smaller data set. So only the final outcome and the conclusions of each conferences are included in the data set. The initial analysis was concordance, sentiment analysis, word cloud, and line counts. So the sentiment analysis, what we found that 80% of the language used is neutral. Only 15 to 18% of the language is positive, and less than 2% is negative for most of the coded words, which is surprising considering that everyone is falling behind their goals. So this was interesting to look at, and we looked at like line counts for words of persuasion which appeared in 2035 lines. Words of assertion only appeared in 488 lines, and words of coercion appeared only in 117 lines. At this stage, I've only coded the concordance analysis for least developed countries. So concordance analysis is basically they look at, we choose a word like least developed countries, and we look at 300 strings before the word and 300 strings after the word, and I coded those on NVivo. And what we found was that there was interest. It was interesting in terms of like it talked about flow of funds, technology transfer, setting up mechanisms for climate action, and most of these funds have to come from developed nations to least developed countries. And another thing that came up often was a Paris Agreement, and this has some important implications because if we look at the Paris Agreement, which happened in 2015, in the US, it was infamous for because the then president walked out from the conference, leaving US to be the only nation out of 200 countries to not cut back on any emissions. And this is just a picture of how the concordance analysis looks like. So you can see least developed countries all appear at the same space because we look at 300 before and 300 after. And this is a sentiment analysis. You can see most of it is neutral. This is a word cloud, these two pictures. And future steps are coding the concordance list of all the other countries as well, and also completing the NLTK. It's basically a tutorial within June. And then constructing a story on discourse, also locating it within the wider theoretical context, and also being very, very clear on limitations. So this is what we're coding right now is concordance analysis. We're not reading all the text. So we can't make any kind of conclusions like, oh, the COP is doing this, COP is doing that. What we can say is we're doing a concordance analysis. We're only looking at discourse. So it's very important to be clear on those limitations so that there aren't any unnecessary inferences. Another step is aligning the codes to UNFCCC jargon just to make it easier for interpretation, and possibly being open to operating with a much larger data set because I'm now more confident having worked with a smaller data set, and hopefully it'll get published in some journals. So that's where I'm at right now. And these are the links to our GitHub, the data and everything. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
And would you like to start with the slides? Okay. There you go.
Hi, everyone. My name's Annalisa. It's my last name, but I go by it, so yeah. I am a mechanical engineering major. This is my first year at CASE. I've lived in Uganda, Singapore, and Cleveland. I like podcasting, poetry, and guitar, and I'm excited to be a Freedman Fellow. So most of my work as a Freedman Fellow, I focused on using already existing digitized data, and that helped me in creating a lot of my exhibits. And this helped me apply the work that I do at the university archives because I saw a lot of the images come from photographs from as early as the 1800s, and I was able to use them in my exhibits. So when I think about digital scholarship, in my experience, it has encouraged me to use digital technologies and instrumentational designs, as well as like library science to critically investigate and like create better exhibits. And as a Freedman Fellow, one of the things I worked on with my mentor, Elizabeth, was basically working on creating accessible exhibits. So when we think about accessibility, most of the times we are thinking about people that can't walk, like the lame, the blind,
the deaf. But then I want us to like think about it quite differently. In today's generation, almost like most people my age will be using social media a lot, Instagram, Snapchat, and all the other platforms you can think about. And one question I'd like to ask the audience to think about for 30 seconds is, how accessible do you think these spaces are? You probably have an answer in your mind, yes or no, whatever it is. I would just like to give my perspective on why I think these spaces aren't the most accessible. It's because when you think about accessibility, and as a Freedman Fellow, one thing I've learned is, as you create exhibits and as you create information that's going to be shared with the world and that's going to be accessed by so many people, most of the time people don't put into consideration the fact that not everyone has the ability to read, not everyone has a reading level of a certain level that can be interpreted when you write your exhibits. And in most of my exhibits, when I used Scalar by KSL or story maps, I always wanted to make more visual exhibits, and that pushes me back to the point that I mentioned earlier about working with the university archives. When working with the university archives, I saw how this information came into place and how all these images were scanned, how they sorted out data, and how all the data would come into place with these images and the evidence from the past to put together these exhibits. And one of the major websites I worked on and was using in creation of my exhibits was Scalar by KSL. I think Mindy talked about Scalar. I think she's using the same thing as I am using. Scalar was pretty new to me, and I had to learn a lot on how to use the website, how to upload photos, and basically how to connect the data together. And I would like to show one of my exhibits that I was able to work on, which is the WRUW by University Archives. And it's like the Case Western's radio station. So I used two different things while building the same exhibit, because me and my mentor are basically working on which exhibit portfolio would create the best exhibit for WREW. And in using Scalar and Story Maps was still in use at the time I was able to make these exhibits. And one thing I liked about Story Maps was the fact that it was able to give me what my vision of accessibility was, like I started with. Story Maps was able to give me ability to create more visual exhibits, and it's not like a book. It's more of like you go into a room and you feel what the presentation is going to look like, and you're able to relate with the information at your own pace. So I'll just play my exhibit and have you watch through it. Then I'll pause. So this was at the beginning of my journey with being a Freedman Fellow, and I had just learned how to use story maps when I made this exhibit. And before I go to the next version of this exhibit, I want you to notice how it looks a bit bland. The images aren't very organized, and I wanted this presentation to be more of my growth journey as a Freedman Fellow, and to show that sometimes when you're creating exhibits, you're going to take time to learn how to do different things. And even if it's taking a long time to learn, it's still going to happen if you keep doing your work consistently and practicing. So for this exhibit, my images were more to this is your left, right? Yeah, were more to the left, and they weren't very centered. And I didn't exactly think about how to center them or why they weren't centered. Like, I really tried to figure that out a lot, but then eventually I did, by the help of like the librarians here at KSL.
Okay. Okay, because I have 3 minutes left, I just wanted to talk about all the images here are from archives. And when I was working in the archives, I was able to see a lot of images that were used in exhibits. And if there was a Black History Month there was a Black History Month event that was being held by KSL, and a lot of the images that I saw that were being used by KSL, I had scanned some of them like in the archives and had come across some of those files. And so that helped me see how all this information comes into place in creating very successful exhibits, because the fact is we do have the information, but how much are we going to put into getting the information that we need? So I showed you my story maps exhibit, and later on this semester, I was able to create the same exhibit on the WRUW project. And it looks a bit more modified because I definitely learned how to orient my images in the right place. So I don't know how I can make this full screen for you, but okay. Yeah, so unlike story maps, Scalar is more of like a book. It's more of like you're flipping through the pages digitally. So this helped me think about the different exhibits that we make, and sometimes you want an exhibit that's more going to be flippable like a book, or an exhibit that's going to be more of like a museum mural that someone's exhibiting through. So I'll go through the 90s and 50s with scanned images from the 90s and 50s on WRUW. Then I'll show a couple of images from the archives. Almost done. Those are images from the 50s. And yeah, so I won't be able to flip through all my book, but I did put my presentation with Ben. So you'll basically just have a look at the work that I did with the archives and how I was able to collect the images and the information to make successful exhibits. Thank you.
All right, our next presenter was not able to join us today, so she sent in a recording that is right here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here to listen to our presentations. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person, but I'm really excited to present on my work on the social determinants of health and the efficacy of the Family Checkup Program. For a brief background, I'm a clinical psychology PhD student here at Case Western, and I'm really interested in studying family-focused intervention programs that promote parenting skills and improved youth mental health. One intervention that my lab focuses on is the Family Checkup Online, which consists of an app-based parenting curriculum and remote meetings with parent coaches to help families improve their family relationships and their parenting skills. This intervention has been shown to be effective with families, and you can see here on the screen just some of the areas that families learn information in. So while we know that this program is effective across all families, I was interested in considering how families might differ in how they engage with and respond to the intervention, specifically in relation to social determinants of health. So I focused specifically in on neighborhood disadvantage, which has to do with the lack of institutional and economic resources in a community. Neighborhood disadvantage has been associated with youth outcomes as well as parent levels of stress, and so I was curious whether neighborhood disadvantage would influence how families are responding to the family checkup. And so based on that, my work had 3 hypotheses. The first is just a general hypothesis confirming results from prior literature suggesting that families living in areas with more neighborhood disadvantage would have higher difficulties with parenting skills as well as more difficulties with youth mental health. My second and third hypotheses are related, and they're that families who are experiencing higher levels of disadvantage would engage more with the family checkup as well as benefit more from the family checkup. And I hypothesize this because families living with higher levels of neighborhood disadvantage may be experiencing more stress and may feel that they don't have any other resources that they can access to help them. So the family checkup may be more beneficial for these families than families living in more affluent communities. For my method, I used a data set that was collected in my lab of 161 families who had adolescent children. They were broken up into the control condition and then the intervention condition, which received access to the family checkup. And parents and youth both participated in assessments throughout the process. Here's a sample of the measures that we use to assess child mental health as well as parenting skills. We assess both more internalizing problems, so things like anxiety and depression, and conduct problems, which has to do more with things like acting out in class, getting in trouble in school, things like that. We assessed also a variety of parenting skills, for example, including positive parenting, as well as parental monitoring, which has to do with how well a family is paying attention to where their children are and making sure that they're safe at all times. The next step was to assess and select some measures of neighborhood disadvantage to include in the research to enrich the lab collected data that I had. And this was an area where the Freedman Fellowship was really helpful, and the support and mentorship and choosing appropriate data sets was really great. I ended up selecting 2 data sets. The first is the Child Opportunity Index, which actually measures more neighborhood advantage, but we can interpret it in the reverse direction to understand neighborhood disadvantage. And it consists of 3 subdomains and gives subscores in these areas. So those are education, health and environment, and social and economic. And then I also use the broad measure of the Area Deprivation Index that includes measures of education, employment, housing, and poverty from the American Community Survey. So to analyze my hypotheses, I did a lot of work within ArcGIS Pro and worked with Dr. Gorham to learn some skills in that area. So the first step that I had to do was to transform the address data from our research participants into census block group data so that we could match families with appropriate measures of their neighborhood disadvantage based on where they were living. And then the next step was, once we got that taken care of, was to merge in the data on parenting and youth mental health so that we were able to create some visualizations of this data. And then I also ran statistical analyses in another program. Just as a brief aside of something else that I've been working on with the fellowship and continue to work on now is using Business Analyst Online to create counts of the access of resources in a community, so things like museums, libraries, and healthcare, and vices in a community, so things like bars, liquor stores, and tobacco outlets, and understanding how access to resources versus vices might also influence family functioning. I've been doing a lot of work with this, working on this all throughout the school year, started running some analyses, but realized a little bit later in the process that there were unfortunately some duplicate businesses showing up in the data set under different names. And so I've been working with Ben, and we've been connecting with people over at Data Axle, where we get the data from, to see what the best way to clean this data might be, because doing it by hand would involve thousands of rows of data, and that's probably not the most foolproof way to clean it. So that's a future direction I'm working on still as well. But back to my current results. For my first hypothesis, which was that families with higher levels of disadvantage would have more difficulties, there was very limited support for this hypothesis, only a few associations, and those were specifically with the education subscale of the Child Opportunity Index, which suggested that higher quality of education available in an area was related to more parental monitoring, as well as lower levels of emotional problems for youth. However, again, this was pretty limited. There was no significant associations with the Area Deprivation Index or any of the other measures from the Child Opportunity Index. Here you can just see a visualization of emotional problems paired with the Education Child Opportunity Index levels, and it was not a perfect correlation. As you can see here, there was some that kind of bucked the pattern that we're seeing, but in general, we saw that higher levels of education quality were associated with lower levels of emotional problems for youth in an area. My next hypothesis that had to do with intervention engagement, we found that the overall Childhood Opportunity Index, so that includes all 3 of those subscales that I spoke about, was associated with both visits with parent coaches as well as number of times that families visited the app. And this was in the direction that we expected, specifically that families who are experiencing lower levels of opportunity in their communities were engaging with the family checkup more, both in terms of the number of visits to the app as well as the number of visits with parent coaches, which is what you see here on the screen. For my third and final hypothesis, which was that families who are experiencing more neighborhood disadvantage would display greater benefits from the family checkup, again, we had pretty limited evidence to support this hypothesis. Again, the Education Childhood Opportunity Index was what showed to be important. And what we found with that was that families who had lower educational quality in their area had greater intervention effects, but only on the measure of positive parenting. So this didn't generalize to the other effects that we were looking at. And again, no other associations with the Area Deprivation Index or any of the other measures that we used. So in terms of the strengths and limitations of my study, first in terms of strengths, this is one of the first that's been able to incorporate some of these objective levels of neighborhood and school quality to understand the efficacy of parenting programs. Specifically, the addition of measures of school quality from the Child Opportunity Index was really a novel idea in the literature and something that I don't think has been done before. There were, as with any study, a few limitations. The first was that, as you could see from my visualizations, most of our participants were from Oregon, and they weren't from the whole state. So we had a pretty limited geographical area, which I think would be interesting to expand upon and see how these results look in the rest of the country. Additionally, we had some trouble in that we didn't have access to all of the families' addresses, or even some of the ones that we did have, they did not match to a census block group. So unfortunately, for some of our analyses, we were not able to include our entire sample size. So that's another area for future research, of course, is looking at some of these things with a larger sample size, which is something that I hope to do in my doctoral dissertation. I wanted to wrap up by discussing a little bit more in detail about what I learned from the Freedman Fellowship, how it supported me on this project, and some of the new questions that I hope to ask and to continue researching. The biggest skill that I think I learned was using geocoding software, specifically ArcGIS Pro and Business Analyst Online. These are both softwares that I had never used before. There's not a lot of familiarity with these softwares within my department, so getting the mentorship through the Freedman Fellowship with Dr. Gorham was really helpful and invaluable, and something that I probably wouldn't have been able to get elsewhere without this support. And again, kind of a novel thing that I was able to do with the support from the fellowship is being able to enrich our lab collected data with this census data and other national geocoded data sets in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So this fellowship really allowed me to explore these questions in a new way and really incorporate measures of social determinants of health into our research as something that we previously had not been able to do. Finally, just some new questions that I've started working on or am looking at working on through my doctoral dissertation and future research. I'm really interested in considering subjective versus objective measures of neighborhood and school quality. So in this study, we use the more objective measures using that geocoded data, but families can also report on their own perceptions of their neighborhood and school quality. So I'm interested in considering which of those might matter more or be more important for outcomes. Also interesting in considering how these results might look different for rural versus urban families, and thinking about that third question here, access to resources and vices, that's obviously going to look a lot different in a rural community versus an urban community, so understanding how these processes are functioning in both of these groups is something that I'm really interested in as well. Thank you so much for your time. I have my email here if you have any questions, and I really appreciate you listening to my presentation today.
And if anyone does have any questions, I'm happy to talk about them. For Rachel, I worked with her pretty extensively on this project, so feel free to direct them to me. And last but not least, Philip, if you would, I think we have your slides here as well. Is PowerPoint or Adobe okay for this?
Yeah, I think that should be fine, right?
Okay.
Can I just like slide through it or? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Hello everyone, my name is Philip. I'm a biomedical engineering student here at Case, and through this Freedman Fellowship I was working on the metadata project. I'm originally from North Macedonia, so I was especially interested in like accessibility to data, and that's why I've had a really good time working on this. So first I want to talk a little bit about the project's goals, and initially the main goal was to basically review and organize all data on scholarly collections available for access at KSL. So this included articles, interviews, posters, presentations, etc. And the data was basically what areas of studies these scholarly collections were in, their titles, abstract, publication date, and so on. With this project, I also updated data on some older projects which existed here for a very long time ago, and then basically the overall goal, I guess, was to create a metadata that allows for easy access to all this information. So this basically involved a lot of spreadsheets, which I had a lot of fun going through. My supervisor, Karen, would give me access to spreadsheets that basically looked like this. It contained a lot of information on the different, for example, articles or interviews that were present, and I would go through them and double check, review them, make sure that all the data was up to date. Some of them were pretty updated, other ones were pretty messy, so it was a mix of experiences doing this. And I ran into a number of challenges throughout this journey, and the first one was that a lot of these spreadsheets involved a very large quantity of information, which for me was very, very overwhelming in the beginning. So when I first started, I would basically have to do review of my reviews and even a review of that just to make sure that everything is like set and well done. And most of these reviews were also very, very time demanding, which I was not expecting initially. I was hoping I would like sit down, go through it, and then have it done. But it turned out that I had to invest a lot more time than I initially anticipated. Some of the links and the data in the spreadsheet was incorrect, so I had to make sure that that was updated. And of course, there were some issues with like special characters, formatting errors, and other miscellaneous items. For overcoming the first challenge with the quantity of information, I basically asked my supervisor if it's possible to have smaller spreadsheets with less projects available, which actually helped me a lot because it just allowed me to see how I progress. As you can see, the green highlights at the very end, I would highlight each row after I'm done. So just seeing that fill up faster was really motivating for me. In terms of time, I made sure that I would like properly schedule all my reviews, and I have a little quote here that basically says it's attention to detail that makes the difference between average and stunning, and that was my guide. I realized that paying attention is basically worth my time, and it really helped me to understand that this is a whole process rather than like once and done thing. And it just changed my mindset and my perspective to it. In terms of the incorrect links and the DOIs and like the special characters, formatting errors, and other miscellaneous items, I communicated with Karen a lot throughout this process, and as I mentioned, I developed on my own highlighting system. I had a different system for like special characters, or a different system when the abstract was not updated and I wanted to change it, which just really helped me like have a better organization of the spreadsheets. And as I mentioned earlier, I would do like review of my reviews to make sure that everything is up to date and I haven't missed anything. Looking forward, there are a lot more reviews to be done. So I have a couple lined up to do and hoping to finish them by the end of the fellowship. And of course, refining the review process would make it easier for future fellows to just, I guess, have easier access to the links that are incorrect already, or be able to like update them faster. And this project would be amazing to be uploading of the metadata to Scholarly Commons at Crew, which is, again, goes back to the main goal of making information more accessible to everyone here. And I just want to like say thank you for this experience, and I want to mention that it has made me realize that CASE is a very collaborative environment, like going through all those journals and all those articles. There's a lot of collaboration here. And I also realized that some of the people here are very productive in their careers because they just keep things out all the time. So that was a very, very interesting realization. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks to those of you who managed to stick it out the entire time. If anyone has questions for the 3 remaining fellows who are still in attendance, please share them now. I have some. First up, Anrita, I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the process of sentiment analysis. Like, did you find any patterns in who used coercive language, why they used coercive language? What was it like just kind of creating the codes for sentiment analysis, all of that stuff? Just tell us more.
So about the process itself, I'm not sure exactly what goes into sentiment analysis. Even on NVivo, it's just like auto code. But the results weren't very surprising because if you look at the document, you'll know that it's mostly like very neutral and bureaucratic language. Words of persuasion appeared more often because there were more words of persuasion. So we found like around 12 words under that category, and we only found like 2 words under words of coercion and 2 words for words of assertion. So the difference was expected, but at the same time, like when we were coding through it, we didn't find anything that was like this has to be done by this time. There weren't many mandates as such. Most of them were we encourage, we persuade, we invite, we request, those kind of words. So does that answer the question?
If there were more coercion, I wonder if change would happen more quickly.
So when I coded the concordance list like later, there were a few deadlines, but I just coded that differently from words of coercion. Yeah. Thank you.
I have another question for you, Anvita. So the corpus of data you're talking about was the United Nations, and then you're using this sentiment analysis and text analysis for looking through all that data. I'm curious if, through this process, have you learned of maybe new ways that you can look at the existing data that you had for this project? Or have you thought about how you can use these tools on different sets of data for other research?
Yes, I did think about using these tools for other sets of data as well. But I think right now the challenge for me is to make it systematic, because if I have to get published in journals, I can't, I need to tie up a lot of loose ends. I have to be very clear about the data set I have. I have to be very clear about what kind of analysis I am doing, just to not make any kind of unnecessary conclusions. I'm sorry, your first question?
Just if you were going to, if you found new technologies or new ways of analyzing the same content, or if you just thought about using new type of data with existing tools that you've learned.
So it is an ongoing process. Right now I'm doing the Natural Language Processing Toolkit tutorial, and there are a lot of like interesting techniques. They look at lexical diversity, the number of unique words for every text. So there's a lot to be done, but it all depends on what question you're asking, essentially. But again, I think this is all like preliminary data. And through this, I think I can ask certain questions, and these techniques will certainly help in answering those questions. Thank you.
I've got one for Philip. Okay. Philip, it takes a very special kind of person to want to work with metadata. I'm wondering if after this process, was it what you expected? Are you still interested in doing this kind of work? Did it scare you away completely? How do you see metadata now kind of towards the other side of such a technical project?
Thank you for the question. It was definitely like a very, very interesting experience for me because I've never worked with it before. And at times it was very frustrating because I just could not get like characters right. I could not get the right information. I couldn't get things sorted out in a timely manner. But I am like pretty involved with like research here, and I feel like it kind of correlates with that experience that I had. So it's kind of like just trying again and again to make it right. I am open to working with it again in the future, potentially, but not as like a full-time experience, if I'm completely honest. Just because like I think it takes a lot of attention to details, it takes a lot of time, and it's just something that I don't know, you have to like keep doing over and over and over again to get better. So yeah, but I'm still open to it.
Of course. Well, that wraps us up this year. Thank you, everyone, for coming, for listening, for presenting. There is information about next year's fellowships on the program, so take those home with you, share them with your friends and colleagues and family and faculty and researchers and everybody. And yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.